Good morning, April 10th, about 8 o'clock. It's Good Friday, and we're going to just continue where we've been working toward all week. We've been looking at the Gospel of Mark, walking through the Passion narrative. Some people call it Holy Week. Whatever you call it, we've been working through it. And yesterday we finished chapter 14. Today we're going to look through most of 15 as we get to the crucifixion of Jesus. And so I just want to go ahead and dive in. So Mark chapter 15 says this: very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things, so again Pilate asked him, "Are you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why, what crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. So again, this, as we talked about yesterday, the kind of kangaroo court of the whole trial of Jesus continues, this time now with the Romans involved. Pilate is here in town in Jerusalem to help keep the peace during Passover. One of the things that we sort of get, but you probably have to do a little more digging on, is that throughout Jesus' life, and even before and even after, the Jewish people were not pleased that Rome was occupying them. And so Rome continued to try to work out ways where they could still be in charge, but allow the people to kind of have their own culture, live their own ways. And so during Passover, it would be with everyone returning back to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover, or a lot of people, there's high chance of insurrection. And so Pilate, being a higher level official, is in Jerusalem, and so the religious leaders bring him to them, and Pilate doesn't know what to do with this, because he clearly figures out that Jesus has done nothing wrong. Good morning, Terry. But in the midst of this, the Jewish teachers of the law continue to rile things up. And we talked about it yesterday, but the teachers of the law were not able to hand out capital punishments. They weren't able to ask for the death of Jesus based on their Jewish traditions. However, if they said he was king of the Jews, they could get Rome to execute him, because that would be tantamount to him saying he was better than Caesar, which they won't stand for. And so Pilate ends up asking, and he does this sort of, we'll call it a nice gesture to the Jewish people each year, where he would release a prisoner. And so he finds someone who he's pretty sure that they won't say yes to, but they do, and Barabbas. And the irony is that Jesus is being tried as an enemy of the state, as an insurrectionist, saying that he was the king of the Jews, but Pilate is also releasing one that even says, in the in the NIV, in verse 7, it says that Barabbas was in prison for insurrection and committing murder. Wow. So here we have a purely sinless, innocent man in Jesus being exchanged for a man who wasn't sinless, wasn't pure, wasn't perfect. I could talk for another 10 minutes just on this symbolism and Jesus' life being handed over for Barabbas's, but we don't have time for that. So, continuing on in verse 16. It says, the soldiers led him away into the place that is the praetorium and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, Hail, King of the Jews! Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him, and when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. The pain and the agony, and dare I say precision in which Rome executed people is up there as some of the worst in history. And I think there's times for those of us who grew up in the church, those of us who followed Jesus for a long time, those of us who call ourselves Christians, I think sometimes we have to stop and remember how painful, remember how agonizing, remember just how brutal this was. This whole beating that Jesus receives here in this section is also called, in other translations, it's called scourging. And people often didn't live through that piece. It was so brutal. It was so terrible. And so in the midst of all of that pain, we have these soldiers who mock him, right? We have these soldiers who make him a crown of thorns. We have these soldiers who put a purple robe on him and mock him by saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And a heartbreaking scene for the Son of God who did nothing, right? So in verse 21, he's been beaten, he's been tried, he's been beaten, been sentenced to death. So in verse 21, it says, a certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the follower of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, the King of the Jews. They crucified 2 robbers with him, on his right and on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself. In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Again, the process of crucifixion is a painful one. I mean, having large spikes driven through your hands and your feet obviously would not be comfortable. Maybe maybe it's a reminder, maybe it's new information, but typically you don't die from the wounds when it comes to crucifixion. Typically you suffocate to death because you can't, you have to continue to press up on your feet, which is super painful. You have to pull up with your arms, which is also super painful, and eventually your body just sags and you just stopped breathing. And like I said, the Romans had perfected their way of execution, and in light of Jesus' life, in light of how he lived, this whole scene is just contrary to all of that. This is not what Jesus deserves, obviously, and we have him even refusing. They offer him in verse 23 wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. This is said to have been sort of a numbing agent, and Jesus refuses it, whether he wanted to stay in complete control of his mind or whether he just didn't want it the feeling numbed at all. We're not sure, but he has plenty of onlookers who are mocking him. The soldiers are gambling for his clothes. Some people are walking by, mocking his predictions of destroying the temple, as are the chief priests. And, at this moment, they think he's gone. He's done. Just another false Messiah, another guy coming to try to lead the people of Israel, try to fill in this prophecy. The Old Testament had all these prophecies about the coming Messiah. And so, Jesus was not the first one to say that was him. He just happened to be the first one who it was. And, most of them either gave up or were killed. And so I'm sure the Jewish people just saw another guy trying to be the Messiah. But in verse 33 it says this. It said, at the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And in the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, some Aramaic that I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to say, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. One man ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar and put it on a stick and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, surely this was the Son of God. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. And so, people still thinking this is over. People still, in some ways, mocking. And Jesus breathes his last. Before that, he asks God, why had he forsaken him? It's an interesting question to ask. It's a helpful reminder that Jesus is both God and man. It's a helpful reminder that even in all of this pain and agony, Jesus felt that. He wasn't immune to this. His nerve receptors and pain receptors were not turned off. He found himself in a place that he looked to the sky and said, God, it feels like you've left me. And then he breathes his last. And the temple has a curtain that's torn from the top to the bottom, which I've never torn a curtain, but I would not start at the top, particularly if I can't reach it. And so there's this imagery here that because the curtain was the Holy of Holies was behind the curtain, and so there's this beautiful picture of God is no longer hidden behind this curtain because of what's happened here. That there is access to the Father through the Son, and we even see one of the guards standing there, and as he hears Jesus cry out for the last, he says, surely this was the Son of God. And I think it's a beautiful picture as well in verse 40 and following, Mark pointing out all the women who had been part of Jesus's ministry, had followed Jesus. And he says that they had cared for his needs as they traveled. Just the fact that they get some airtime, so to speak, in this story is pretty amazing from a historical perspective. The importance of Jesus for those who Jesus just loved everyone. There, as Paul talks about, there is no male or female, Jew or Greek, slave or master. Everyone is the same in the eyes of God and of Jesus. And so it's interesting and kind of cool to see the women who were part of Jesus' ministry pointed out here at the very last. And then Jesus is buried. He's put in a tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and they seal it, as we know from other accounts, and that's it. Jesus, as far as this story in this moment, as far as we read, is dead. We know that, well, many of us know that it doesn't stay that way, but there's something to being able to remember this right now, as we lead to Easter in a couple days. Just to remember that the Son of God, who was perfect, who led a sinless life, who taught us how to live, that he gave his life for us, in the most painful of ways, to point out just how much he loves us and how much his Father loved us. And I could go on for another lot of minutes. I feel like I've already gone long today, but let's just remember Jesus today. Let's keep him on our mind, keep him on our hearts. The pain, the agony, the suffering, and why, because of all of this, we have hope. In the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of this crisis, the sacrifice of Jesus, the crucifixion of Jesus, and more importantly, the resurrection, which we will celebrate on Sunday, that gives us hope. We know that we have a God who loves us. We know we have an all-powerful God who has power over death. Nothing's impossible. So let me pray for us, and just pray for our days, pray for maybe our weekend, and then we'll be done. So God, we are thankful for the story and the example and the witness of Jesus. God, I just ask that we will be mindful of him all day, that we will think about his crucifixion and his sacrifice, the extent to which he loved us, and then what this death and resurrection mean in our own lives. God, may it bring us hope during the midst of a crazy, chaotic, at times depressing and anxiety-ridden season that we're all going through. May we find and put all of our hope and faith in you and your Son. God, we love you. We thank you for Jesus, and we pray all of these things in his powerful name. Amen. Well, I hope you have a great day. We'll have TCC family. We'll have our services up tomorrow. I pray that you have a great Easter. And right now, he's in the tomb, but he is risen. Have a great day.